So, Jay Ruud, what lovable book are we talking about today?
Well, Stacey Margaret Jones, I'll give you a hint. Heroic couplets.
I'll need more. Welcome to Between the Covers, where we discuss one lovable book per episode. And I am trying to figure out what the lovable book is this week. I need a second hint.
Okay. Here's hint number 2. Charles Kinbote.
Have I read this book?
I think so.
Oh, no.
I wouldn't swear to it. But
Last hint.
A plethora of explanatory notes.
What was the first hint?
Heroic couplets.
Pale Fire by Vladimir Nabokov.
That is absolutely correct.
Awesome.
It is Pale Fire.
All right. Well, before we get into Pale Fire, wow, that is a deep cut. I did not see that one coming. We want to celebrate that this is our 10th episode of Between the Covers. And
we're 10% of the way to the 100 lovable books.
We're 10% of the way. And so what we'd like to do is celebrate with our listeners. And we want to do a giveaway. So we are going to give away a signed copy of some of our books. One of mine, since I have one.
Signed copy of Mr. Catherine.
We'll see how generous Jay is feeling and how many books he wants to give away of his books that he's written.
This one.
Treasure of Sherwood.
Treasure of Sherwood.
And the way you can enter is to leave a review on Apple Podcasts of our podcast. And when you leave the review, comment at the end with your most loved book. And we'd love to see the comments. And within a couple of weeks, we will randomly choose a winner, give you a shout out on the show. And thank you for your time.
And send you those signed books.
Just
All right. Think of how much those will be worth.
An unsigned one has got to be worth hundreds of dollars. All right. So that's a little Hugh Grant joke there. Pale Fire. Before we get into this, you made your list by compiling a number of lists of recommended books, best books in English, top 100 books of the last century, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how you made your list. And then from that list, your master list, you pulled the 100 most lovable. Who else?
Well, there is one other step in there.
Oh, okay.
I added some books that I thought ought to be on the list that weren't on those lists.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
My most loved books.
Oh, is this one of those?
No.
Oh, okay. So who else likes Pale Fire?
Lots of people, but not as many as like Lolita.
I was going to say, Nabokov is, when people talk about Nabokov, they don't talk about Pale Fire. They talk about Lolita.
Most people know Lolita. And Nabokov, of course, was Russian born, and he was actually a very well-known novelist in the Russian language, but he ended up coming to the U.S. And taught Russian at Cornell University and started writing books in English. And Lolita, he wrote in 1955, and it was a huge, huge bestseller. In fact, it made him so much money that he quit teaching.
Oh, he's living the writer's dream.
Moved back to Western Europe and started writing Pale Fire in 1959, 1960, 1961, while he was in France and Switzerland.
Well, are you answering which lists it's on, or?
Well, I'm getting to it.
Oh, okay. I'm just checking.
I'm going a roundabout way there.
Okay.
Lolita is on the Modern Library list of the 100 best novels, English novels from the 20th century. It's number 4 on that list. It's on the Penguin Readers list of the 100 must-read books. It's number 52 on that list. It was on the Time magazine list of 100 best novels in English since 1923. It's on the Guardian list of best novels in English. It's on the Observer list of best world novels. It's on the Norwegian Book Club list. That's a lot of lists.
Are we talking about Lolita or are we talking about Pale Fire?
I'm getting there. So, I mean, Nabokov's Lolita would be if the novel most people would pick if they were going to do a greatest novels list.
Right.
But I don't love Lolita.
Oh.
It doesn't strike me as that great a book.
So we're not going to get to Lolita later on in this series.
I promise you we will not.
Okay. It's not on your list.
I do not. I can't identify with or empathize with Humbert.
Well, I hope not.
And I don't understand why Lolita is thought so highly of. Pale Fire is also on the Modern Library list.
Okay.
It's just further down than Lolita. It's on the Time Magazine list. And there's a critic named Larry McCaffrey who wrote a list in direct response to the Modern Library list that he called the 20th century's greatest hits. On his list, Pale Fire is number 1.
Oh, wow.
And the fact is, Pale Fire is a much more interesting book than Lolita. It's much more experimental.
Oh,
and
yes.
Because he made so much money.
Avant-garde.
Yeah, because he made so much money on Lolita, he was free to let his imagination go with Pale Fire and do something that was completely new.
Yes.
So,
and was still able to get it published.
Because he was Vladimir Nabokov, damn it.
And he
wrote Lolita.
Right. Well, it's interesting because, as you know, I'm teaching Introduction to Creative Writing, and one of the things we do every class period is I've set aside 10 or 15 minutes for them to free write. And I give them a prompt and I say a little challenge or something to write about if they don't have something else they're working on. And today I said to them, it can suck, right? Just write freely. It doesn't matter. You know, there's no stakes. You're not handing this in. You don't have to turn it into something if you don't want to. It's to experiment. And in their small way, they're doing what he was able to do because of the commercial success of his previous book. Mm-hmm. He was able to say, I'm just going to do what I want.
Yeah. Now I'm going to give them something they don't expect.
Which is, he didn't do a second Lolita.
No.
He did something completely different.
Yeah.
All right. So.
Down and dirty summary.
I mean, this is a challenge that sometimes bests you, Jay Ruud. So let's try for the down and dirty summary. Okay, what is it about or how is it about that? Do your best.
It's a book that it actually has 4 parts, but it has 2 main parts which complement each other in a very strange way. Nabokov writes it as if it's a scholarly edition of a poem, which is written in heroic couplets by an imaginary American poet named John Shade, and it's Shade's last work because he died immediately after finishing it. It's a kind of autobiographical poem in heroic couplets. It's Wordsworthian. It's like the prelude in a way, but it's also has the tone of Pope because it's in heroic couplets. It's in 4 cantos, so it's probably a bit of a reminder of Ezra Pound. So Shade is sort of a combination of all this sort of canonical poetry.
And this poem is in the book.
Yeah. The poem
is written by, in reality, Nabokov.
Yeah.
Okay.
But in the book, it's written by John Shade.
Right.
It's a poem about death and the possibility of life after death. In the poem, Shade's daughter commits suicide, or dies by suicide, I should say. In the 4th canto, he's trying to find evidences of an afterlife. He thinks he has it, and then it turns out to blow up in his face, kind of. But at the end, he actually has some kind of crazy hope. That's the first section.
But that's not the avant-garde.
No,
aspect.
That's very traditional. People have read the poem and thought, "Oh, this is garbage." It's just old-fashioned verse,
rhyming.
Yeah, heroic couplets. But some people have actually liked the poem. Yeah. I kind of like the poem. The poetry editor of The New Yorker actually liked the poem. Paul Muldoon was the poetry editor of The New Yorker, and he actually wrote that he's a Pulitzer Prize winner himself. And he said it's actually, a pretty good poem, but you have to know the context. The context is the commentary.
Right. So this is the avant-garde or the unusual, the inventive new thing that Nabokov is doing.
Yeah.
Is that the novel takes place within the commentary notes on the poem.
Yes. It also takes place in the poem.
Right. But those two texts conversing with each other.
Right. Charles Kimbote is a neighbor of John Shade and is a friend of his. They go for walks every night and talk about things. Shade is killed, and which you don't find out until late in the commentary.
Don't talk too much about it.
After his death, Kimbote goes to his grieving widow and gets her permission to publish the poem and to write
the commentary,
a critical edition of it. Mm-hmm. So she says, okay. But after she's done that, all of the other professors in the English department where John Shade teaches say, what? You told him what? He's not qualified to do this. And then there's Shade scholars all over America who are saying, no, this man's not qualified to do. But he steals the manuscript, which is on index cards, 80 index cards, and absconds with it out west somewhere. Nabokov makes up the name of a state, Utana or something like that, where Kimbote is hidden away in a cabin, and he's writing this. And you don't know that if you didn't read the foreword, because the foreword is Kimbote's foreword to the edition, and he talks about how he got the manuscript. Right. So anyway, you start to look at his commentary, and then you realize that his commentary has absolutely nothing to do with the poem.
It is bozo bonker sauce.
Here's an example.
Are we out of the down and dirty summary now? Are we getting into
because
again you've been bested by
Well, this is not an easy thing to do, give a down and dirty summary of. But let me give you an example of what happens in the commentary. Line 12 of Shade's 999 line poem.
Is the poem called Pale Fire?
The poem is called Pale Fire, which is an allusion to Shakespeare's Timon of Athens. In fact, the quotation in Timon of Athens is, "The moon is an errant thief, and her pale fire she snatches from the sun," which is usually interpreted as an image depicting the process of poetic inspiration. But I think what Nabokov is using it for is Kimbote is the moon who's taking his light from Shade, which is an interesting way of putting it.
Yeah. And also Shade. He's a ghost kind of in the book because he's dead. Yeah. There's a lot there. All right.
So anyway, in line 12 of Pale Fire.
Let's get back to that.
Shade uses this expression, the crystal land. So Kimbote decides to comment on that, this crystal land. Perhaps an allusion to Zembla, my dear country. After this, in the disjointed, half-obliterated draft, which I am not at all sure I have deciphered properly, this is in his notes on the manuscript. This is the part that was deleted by Shade, but he's reading this in the deleted part. I must not forget to say something that my friend told me of a certain king. Alas, he would have said a great deal more if a domestic anti-Carlist, which is Shade's wife, Kimbote is convinced that the chief reason that Shade left out all the stuff that he told him to put in was because his wife was against him and thought he was an idiot, which of course he is. But if a domestic anti-Carlist had not controlled every line he communicated to her, many a time I have rebuked him in bantering fashion. You really should promise to use all this wonderful stuff, you bad gray poet, you. And we would both giggle like boys. But then, after the inspiring evening stroll, we had to part, and grim night lifted the drawbridge between his impregnable fortress and my humble home. That king's reign, 1936 to 1958, will be remembered by at least a few discerning historians as a peaceful and elegant one. And he goes on for paragraph after paragraph, telling you the story of this king of his country, Zembla. The king's name is Charles II. As the commentary goes on like this, you come to realize that Kimbote is King Charles. That he's been hiding in the United States after fleeing from his country. And then there's 5 lines later in the commentary, Shade uses the phrase in line 17 of his poem, but then the gradual. And the commentary, Quimbote's commentary says, by an extraordinary coincidence, inherent perhaps in the contrapuntal nature of Shade's art, our poet seems to name here gradual, gray, a man whom he was to see for one fatal moment 3 weeks later, but of whose existence at the time, July 2nd, he could not have known. Jacob Gradus called himself variously Jack de Gris or Jacques de Grey or James de Grey. So this is the word gradual makes him
go off on this whole big thing.
And this goes on through the whole commentary, which is about 3 times as long as the poem itself. Right. And it's all about King Charles and his escape from the Bolsheviks who took over Zembla. And, you get later on in his commentary to the point where Shade is killed. The way Quimbote sees it is that this Charles Gray, John de Grey, was a Bolshevik agent who'd been sent to kill him, to kill the king of Zembla. Mm-hmm. Since he's out walking with Shade, the guy mistakes Shade for him and shoots Shade. Mm-hmm. All of which has nothing to do with the poem.
The poem that he's supposed to be doing a critical edition of.
That he's commenting on.
Well, it's interesting because I also teach Introduction to Poetry. And one of the things I stress a lot is that everything you need to know to experience the poem is in the poem. And you also can't say, well, it's open to interpretation, and I say it's about this. And that's different from saying, I read it and it made me think of this that happened to me, because that is me being, associating instead of saying the poem is about this, which there's nothing in the text.
I think it's about that.
Yeah, there's nothing in the text that says the poem is about that.
Gradual is there.
Exactly. I remember when I read that, I was just like, this is hilarious. But it also is like the poem is like ink blots for him or something, because he has so much that he wants to say and he can't say it without, attaching himself to somebody else's work. Yeah. Because he's in hiding.
Yeah. And he's been telling on their evening walks, he's been telling Shade the story of King Charles II's life and all the things that happened to him. And he knows that Shade is working on this poem, and Shade won't tell him what the poem's about. And he's trying to feed him all this stuff and thinks he's going to put that in the poem. Imagine his disappointment when he reads the poem and there's nothing there about
he's
what
so vain. He probably thinks that poem's about him.
Exactly.
And this is interesting because I read Pale Fire mid-90s, probably. And I didn't remember necessarily any of this detail in terms of the specificity of the commentator. I just remember it was a really interesting way of telling a story in which the form is part of the story told, and very imaginative and inventive, and that the commenter, the critic, was bonkers, and that it's so fun because you kind of open it up with, okay, I'm going to accept, right? So it also becomes an experience for the reader in terms of how active or passive of a reader are you? Mm-hmm. Because to get the full effect of the novel, you have to push back on Quimbote. Or you have to know, you have to have some objectivity where he is concerned.
Yeah. And he does not have any objectivity.
Right.
It's, in a way, it's a kind of reductio ad absurdum of the critical theory of reader response criticism.
Right.
Which
we interpret that Latin for our listener.
Reductio ad absurdum means reduction to the absurd.
Okay.
It takes the idea of reader response criticism and pushes it so far that it becomes absurd.
Right.
It was early 70s, basically, that reader response criticism became a popular theory among English scholars or literature scholars. Stanley Fish, Norman Holland, Wolfgang Iser, were some of the earliest people to write about it. And basically, it suggests that a work of literature does not exist until the reader makes it. It's the reader who half creates the story by reading it. And so the reader's response to the story becomes the story. And that's what's happening with Kinbote. But his responses are the responses of somebody who's way over the top.
Right. And it's something that Nabokov could write because he is a professor in this world. He's going to be familiar with this scholarly idea and this discourse around this. But he's also a creative writer, and he probably has his own feelings on that.
Yeah.
As the author of Lolita.
Yeah, he certainly does.
So he's saying, here's where this is going to go. If we follow this, if we take this train all the way to the terminus, right, this is where we could end up in our reader response.
Yes. Nabokov's father was killed by somebody who had intended to kill somebody else. So the scene with Shade being shot is kind of directly out of his own experience.
Gives me goosebumps.
But most people will stop there at their interpretation of the story. But there are suggestions, there are Easter eggs kind of throughout the commentary that suggest there may be other things happening. Mm-hmm. And so people have disputed the interpretation that I just gave you and said, actually, what if, it is possible that John Shade wrote the poem Pale Fire and also wrote the commentary as a kind of joke, and that Kinbote does not exist at all.
Is there textual support for that, or
as much as there is
for the other,
for Kinbote being an actual person,
right? Because the reader is accepting the conceit of Kinbote as the person.
Yeah,
when there might
not be a Kinbote at all.
Right.
Assuming there is a Kinbote may be the king, or he may be delusional. He may not be the king at all.
I remember when I read it, I felt like he was delusional, that, he was just, as I said, bozo bonkers, just out there. That was kind of my perception, that he just kept going farther and farther. And like, what is going on with this guy?
No.
Which honestly, it is a challenging book to read, especially, I think, just physically, because you're going back and forth, from the poem to the commentary. So it can be challenging in that way, but there's a lot of just verve in it because it's so clever. And I think it's a great object lesson in going where the work needs to go and not constraining yourself and just, going crazy.
Well, here's another suggested interpretation. There's a character that's just mentioned in the commentary. Professor V. Botkin, who is a professor of foreign languages at the college where Shade teaches. And Botkin is described in the notes. So the four parts of the book are the foreword, the poem, the commentary, and then an index glossary, which kind of tells you who all the characters are and things like that. And in the glossary, Botkin is described as an American scholar of Russian descent. That's basically all he says. But Botkin is sometimes spelled Botkine, which is an anagram of Kinbote. And so some people have suggested Botkin is the guy who does the commentary, but Botkin is insane and everybody knows it. And he believes that his name is Kinbote and that he's the king of Zembla, and neither Kinbote nor Zembla actually exists.
Exactly.
So there are all these interpretations, any of which could be possible.
Sure.
The way he's written the book.
Did he ever come out with any kind of...
Oh, you wouldn't think he would do that.
Some people do. I don't know. That's why I asked.
No, he never. I don't think he ever said this person's right or that person's right.
So I think we have talked about what's lovable.
Yes.
I did love it. I found it challenging. I read it on your recommendation, I think, because you said you just love it. You love it so much. It's better than Lolita. I read Lolita and you were like, Pale Fire is better. So I read it and I was like,
do you agree that it's better?
It's very different. Lolita's kind of traditional plot-driven novel. This is something completely different. It's unique. There's nothing like it.
At least it was unique when it came out.
Yes. And so I loved it, even though it's a challenging read. So why, maybe I've answered my question, why do you think people might not love this or might not want to read it?
A lot of people didn't love it when it first came out. There were people who
The reader response critics?
No, I think they were fine with it. One critic called it unreadable. Another called it a total wreck. But novelist Mary McCarthy gave it a rave review.
Mm-hmm.
And Clockwork Orange author Anthony Burgess thought it was great.
Yep.
And Harold Bloom called it a remarkable tour de force and clear evidence of Nabokov's genius. Mm-hmm. So the more insightful critics really saw there was something there. But the thing is, most critics just didn't know what to do with it. They didn't know how to respond to it. And that's because it's one of the earliest examples of what becomes known as postmodernism.
Right.
It comes out in 1962.
Oh, okay.
Now, the other postmodern novels, Catch-22, comes out in 1960. John Barth's Sotweed Factor, which we may hear about at some point in the future, came out in 1960. Both of those are early postmodern novels. This has indeterminacy of meaning that is typical of some postmodern works. Structurally, it's completely new. Right.
It's challenging to read in that.
Yeah.
I remember feeling a little overwhelmed, like, do I read the whole poem and then the notes? Do I read each note should I read the whole poem first and then come back and read the poem and the note? Like, you have to make some decisions for yourself as a reader. How am I, because it's not just a page turner novel. You're not going to do that.
Basically, people have looked at it as an early form of hypertext.
Right. That's really well put.
You can read it one, poem first, commentary next. You can read it going back and forth.
Right.
You can do whatever you want to. So that's another kind of postmodernism. And also it's metafiction. It's fiction about fiction and how writing is done. So all those things are postmodern.
Which is very, postmodern, and also questioning the text itself.
Yeah.
Right.
And you certainly do a lot of questioning of this
text. And circling a question, and there's no definitive answer.
Because of the indeterminacy.
When I was revising my novel with my agent, she said, okay, you have to make a decision about this character, and you have to know, because she asked me a question about one of the characters, and I said, I've written it ambiguously on purpose. And she said, well, what do you think? And I said, I haven't decided. And she said, you have to decide, and it has to be clear to the reader, because I'm not Nabokov, and I'm writing a, kind of commercial novel, and the reader is going to want to know the answer to that. And this is not that.
No.
There isn't an answer. There's only more questions. And that's part of the experience of it. And that's the joy you can find in the novel if you're willing to embrace the ambiguity of it, accept it as it is. So, but I can see that there would be people that would not enjoy it, especially I think if they didn't have any guidance. Yeah. They saw it on a shelf and they picked it up because it's Nabokov. And then they're like, what?
This isn't Lolita.
What is this book? So they should
listen to our podcast.
They
first.
should, and hopefully now they'll listen to this episode and they'll go read it and enjoy it.
I hope so.
Yes. So where do you rank this glorious book? This lovable book. This will be the 10th book.
I think I'm going to put it 7th.
And what is ahead of it and what is behind it?
I wish I knew.
Oh, Jay. So you're going to have a list on your website?
Yes.
jayruud.com.
Yes.
And you can find the list there.
Yes, you can.
All right. All right.
It's gotten to where I can't keep track.
I can see that.
Without the actual list.
You should put it in your notes there.
And for episode 11, I will do that.
All right. So this is 7th.
That's what I'm going to say.
All right. Yeah. So we can't wait to see the list on your website.
There we go.
All right. Well, that was I love talking about that book. I really did not see that coming. It really surprised me.
Well, this won't surprise you. It's time for Chaos Reader.
All right. So this week, I want to talk about the new Robert Jobson biography of Catherine, the Princess of Wales, because I thought I'd go for something a little lighter after the LBJ biography and a little shorter And it's only about 250 pages, I think. But it's a brand new biography of her coming out in a year where she's had a lot of media scrutiny and social media scrutiny about her, what's going on with her, et cetera. So I'm interested in reading this. I've read another biography of her, so I'm not sure what new things I'll learn, but I just started it, and the first chapter is very enjoyable. I did notice, however, that the photographs are in upside down and backwards. So when you get to the photo section, the section has been input into the book backwards. I've never seen that before.
Maybe it's just your copy.
I know. I was wondering that. Maybe it's going to be worth millions of pounds.
Or maybe the publisher will hear this and go in and say, "Stop the presses."
That's right. All right. Well, before we go, let's remind listeners to buy our books and be readers of our books. Mr. Catherine by Stacey Margaret Jones and Jay Ruud's new book, Treasure of Sherwood, from the Robin Hood Mystery Series.
You can find these on Amazon.
And also, this is our 10th episode, as we said. And so we're really excited, and we want to celebrate by giving signed copies of our books away. So to enter that contest, please, again, review our podcast on Apple Podcasts. And when you leave your review, then also comment with your most loved book. And please rate, review, follow, like, subscribe, share, tell your friends, and help our podcast keep going.
And we hope our new listener in Nigeria will write a review so that we can see what he or she thought about our podcast.
That's right. So we'll see you next week. Between the covers.